and it is the second most photographed and painted spot here in Arizona. I guess the Grand Canyon is still number one. Now most geologists do agree that that mountain over there was created when a volcano began erupting around 25 million years ago. Now today, Superstition Mountain and a mountain range is a federally protected wilderness area covering approximately 250 square miles. Now being designated a wilderness means no motorized vehicles, no mechanical or electronic equipment, and no prospecting or mining of any kind allowed within the wilderness boundaries. Now coming up on both sides of the tracks, we have cactus. First, the tall ones, the giant saguaro. They only grow in the Sonoran Desert. They can live up to 250 years, and they are between 50 to 100 years old when they begin growing their first arms. Now over here on the left, we have a variety. First, the prickly pear. We have a couple over there by the trees, several around that small saguaro, and a couple more of them coming up there in the middle. And we have cholla. Right beside the tracks there, we have the staghorn. In the middle, some buckhorn. And the tall ones coming up are chain fruit cholla, also called the jumping cactus. Now back over here to the right. We have those trees with a green bark, the Palo Verde. Now they are members of the conifer tree family. They are like evergreens, but they don't have much for leaves, so they store the chlorophyll in the trunk, turning a bark green. An Arizona state tree is a blue Palo Verde. And the state flower of Arizona is a saguaro cactus bloom. Now coming up on the right beside the tracks here, we have mining equipment, a head frame, muck bucket, and a winch that you would find on the main shaft of a mine. We also have the different size ore carts beside the head frame. The small gray one was used down inside the mine to get that ore to the main shaft and on the muck bucket. Larger ones were used to haul it away to some type of processing facility near the mining operations. Coming up on the right, a couple other trees that are common out here that I'll point out for you. First one right beside the tracks there. That is a mesquite tree. And the wood is great for barbecuing and smoke flavoring a variety of foods. And the second tree with the silver bark inside the fence there a few yards, desert ironwood. They only grow in the Sonoran Desert and are a favorite of wood carvers out here in the Southwest. At the bottom of the hill there, we have the old Wasp gold mine. Been owned by the same family since 1983. A couple of years later, they did manage to get $500,000 in gold out of that large trench at the bottom of that hill. We call that type of mining open pit. Now looking off into the distance, north of Goldfield about 35 miles, we have Four Peaks. That is the tallest mountain in this part of Arizona at a little over 7,600 feet above sea level. Now during an average winter, we will see snow up there 2 or 3 times. But the amazing feature about that mountain is up there on its southeast face. At 7,200 feet, between peaks number 3 and 4, you are going to find yourself the entrance to North America's only commercially owned and operating amethyst mine. And it does produce some of the finest in the world today. There are a couple of shops back here in Goldfield that carry Four Peaks amethyst if you'd like to check it out before you leave town today. air shaft goes down to the right. And more gold mines out there in the desert. Now first, that old air shaft and the yellow building on the other side belonged to the Mammoth Gold Mine. Now back in the 1890s, the Mammoth, which is located between the fence down there in the wash and that yellow building, was the largest and richest mine here in the Goldfield mining district. It's also the deepest gold mine here in the valley. The main shaft is a little over 1,000 feet to the bottom. Now they began discovering the other gold mines out there during the 1880s, and it was business partners from Mesa, Higgs and Morris, filing the first claim. Now they also had the gold to themselves out here for a couple of years because there were still a few Apache in the area, and at that time they were the only two men brave enough to come out here in the valley and risk their lives to grab some of that gold. Now it's very early, 1890s, when it was finally safe enough so other folks could come out hoping to discover their own gold mine, and a few of them were hoping that they'd be the one to discover the legendary Lost Dutchman mine and make a fortune. And at that time, there was one mining company out here digging that gold by the ground. Now before I go on with a brief history of the gold mining that occurred 127 years ago, look out the left side of the train over there to the east. We're going to have some good views of Goldfield Ghost Town with the legendary Superstition Mountain in the background coming up. Now in the past, Superstition Mountain over there had been called several names. And the most common heard back then were Thunder Mountain, Crooked Top, or Espuma, and that's Spanish for foam light. Now it was the late 1860s when that mountain over there ended up with the name Superstition. And the credit for naming that mountain belongs to the farmers that were settling here in Arizona along the Salt River, Gila River Valley, and the Verde River Valley. No, wasn't long after a few of them farmers considered that most of the local Native Americans were extremely superstitious about the mountain after listening to their stories. And eventually a handful of them farmers started calling it Superstition, and that is a name that stuck. Now back to the gold mining. One day in 1891, Higgs was out here hunting. Got a couple of 100 yards back upstream in the vicinity of the Mammoth Gold Mine sitting back there in the wash, and came across a vein of gold partially exposed from flash flooding. And that discovery was the one that got the mining town of Goldfield growing out here in the valley. It was just a few days after Higgs found that vein back there in the wash. A couple of the local newspaper headlines stated, "Did they discover the Lost Dutchman gold mine? They just found a very large, very rich body of gold ore in the Goldfield mining district just west of Superstition Mountain." And folks started moving out here from Phoenix and Mesa. And it didn't take very long for the population of Goldfield to exceed them two towns. It was 1893 when the mining town established their charter and became incorporated. In October that year, they opened up Goldfield's post office. And a couple of years later, during a peak of the gold mining out here in 1895, Goldfield had over 30 businesses and over 40 buildings in it. There were an estimated 2,500 residents all over the valley. And about 1,000 of them were gold miners and their families living out here among the hills in their canvas wall tents. There were a dozen gold mines operating out here then, and only two of those, the Black Queen and the Mammoth, were large enough and significant enough that we are still talking about them today. Now going back to the 1880s when it was getting started, and the word was spreading throughout the Southwest that gold was discovered here in the Western Superstition. Holland Sullivan, a mining company out of Denver, read this story about gold being discovered out here, came here in 1886, and they started buying up claims. And they offered Higgs and Morris $20,000 for their claim, and they accepted the offer. Out of that handful of claims Holland Sullivan ended up with, two of them did pretty well. The first one was the Black Queen. Between 1887 and 1891, that mine produced $500,000 in gold. And this back when it was worth $20 an ounce. And the other claim that did well for the mining company was the Mammoth Gold Mine. It had been a gold that Higgs found back there in the wash. Did lead to the largest and richest body of gold ore that was ever discovered out here, the Mormon Stope. And for nearly 2 years, the first several hundred feet of it was producing 300 ounces of gold per ton. There was a 20-stamp mill set over there at the Mammoth Mine to process the ore 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now between 1891 and 1897, the total gold production out of the Mammoth Mine was 64,000 ounces. And at just $20 an ounce, that was $1,200,000 worth. Not a bad return on that $20,000 investment. And all of the other gold mines out here in the valley under different ownership produced $3 million during that same time period. Now the gold out here didn't last very long. By 1897 it was running out, mines were shutting down, and miners and their families were leaving the area. And the Mammoth, one of the few gold mines still operating out here, were finding veins of low-grade ore. And then the mine owners got greedy, and they made a decision to follow one of those veins a little farther underground, hoping it would turn into a larger, richer vein of gold. But this time, the luck had run out. What they got instead was groundwater, and a lot of it, after cracking into an aquifer, flooding the mine. The old pumps they had back then couldn't keep up with that water flowing in. And the Mammoth Gold Mine being flooded, shut down. Mining company going broke, they packed up and headed back to Denver. A couple months later, everybody gone from Goldfield, United States Postal Service officially made it a ghost town when it deactivated the post office in November of 1898 and put an end to the richest era in gold mining here in Goldfield Mining District. Thank you for riding along the Superstition Scenic Railroad.